I'd like to start out by recapitulating to some extent what we did last week. We started out last week with the 144,000, and I claimed that we could follow them through the revelation. And it's very important to do so, to see what becomes of them, and to also understand that this is past. This has already happened. And we know it has through the historian who, though he didn't know this text of Revelation, he writes down the history of the Jewish war. And as part of that Jewish war, he is there. What happens with his writings, with his history, is that it follows so closely with the spiritual or symbolic account that John wrote that we can hardly help but match them up. If we read the historical account in Revelation, too many similarities, too many similarities. And besides that, the Revelation is written almost exclusively in the past tense, as though it was happening just right afterwards, as though John was writing what he was observing. And of course, where he's observing it from is the sky. He's in the sky. He claims he's been raptured. So we go back to First Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13 and following. And there we have Paul's description of what the rapture is all about. You all know those verses. And we remember just before Paul had these things to say, or maybe, just before, Yahshua also prophesied that the generation that was alive then would not pass, would not be gone until the things that he prophesied came to pass. And what he prophesied was the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple. In fact, he prophesied that the entire city was going to be there without one stone left upon the other. And we read in Josephus, the historian, that this is exactly what came about within 40 years. That is one biblical prophetic generation. It came to pass. Incredible thing, I think. Probably either the most embarrassing verse in the Bible, certainly the most embarrassing prophecy, or it's a prophecy that came true exactly like it was given. We have a knowledge of tribulation then coming through the Romans to the entire Roman world, a tribulation that calls people in every province to come against the believers, to seek them out, to execute them, because they were blamed by the emperor for setting Rome afire, where many, many were killed, thousands, and a large portion of Rome was destroyed. Now, the emperor himself probably set that fire or had it set because he had a great plan of rebuilding the entire city of Rome in his vision of what it should look like. And he was going to rename Rome to Neropolis. That is after him. Of course, that emperor is Nero. We also find is the face of the beast in Revelation 13. So the tribulation comes from Nero. It starts just before the war, and it continues on in full strength until that emperor is killed, is executed himself, 3.5 years. The secular of the time, the beginning of the war there in Israel, call upon the mountains to fall on them, call upon the people to hide them. Who will be able to stand? Asks Revelation 16:17. And then we remember as that was happening, the mansion in the sky that Yahshua promised the bride to, to save them all, bring them all out, and house them in the Father's house. For it has many mansions, and I explained that that word mansion, meon, doesn't mean a great big old house, great big old expensive place, a plaza, or a place to build your own kingdom, but rather a mansion, a meon, is only a room built upon a small house where the bride comes in and spends a year in the house of the groom to see if they can get along. It's not a live-in situation. They're kept apart, the bride and groom, because the parents are there and the rest of the groom's family are there. Just they live in separate quarters and they see how they get along for a year. And at that time, they decide whether to continue to be married or not. I mean, if they decide to be married, then they have a party and they have the formal marriage. That's not until they've lived together for a year. That might be a pretty good practice to do again sometime, if we could get anyone to do that these days. But just like the saints, the 144,000, they are said to be the bride of Messiah, and they are virgins, as you recall, who are gathered from the four corners of the earth by the winds during this war. We read that in Matthew 24:30, as a bride to be gathered from the winds, and in Revelation both. There are warnings found in Josephus' Jewish War concerning the tribulation, the great Neronic persecution, and we actually have two different accounts of that. One comes from a Roman historian, Tacitus, and also that only a little flock of holy ones, kadoshim, would be saved through rapture at that time. At least we suppose so. We'll go on a little more and find out more about that, if they were or not. Revelation says 12,000 from each tribe of Israel, with the exception of one tribe, and that is the tribe of Dan, D-O-N. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Dan in Hebrew means judgment. So that tribe is being judged by not taking a part in this great gathering away. And I have read by some say that's because the tribe of Dan is the one to apostatize, is the one to go back to the golden calf in the time of the splitting of Israel into two. But also in other prophecies from that time, we understand that the beast came out of the tribe of Dan, which is very possible when you see some of the place names throughout Europe. And river names, there is the title Dan in many of them, or just DN, the Dnieper River, the Danube River, Denmark. There's a couple, but there are many, many more all throughout Europe. Sure gives us a clue of what tribe went up that way to settle those parts in the dispersion. But 144,000 was to be saved. In Ezekiel chapter 7, we went there and read an amazing account of the destruction of Jerusalem that also goes along with what we're reading here in Revelation and in Josephus. And in that account, the holy ones, the Kadoshim of Elohim, were all marked out for salvation during that time. And we read that Ezekiel 7, a little bit of it. It's an astounding prophecy, 700, maybe 700 years before. Let me see, was it about that? Well, yeah. Beforehand, about 700 years, it prophesied destruction of Jerusalem that Yeshua again prophesied in about 30 AD. And Ezekiel says that a certain bunch of people that are marked with a T, marked with a Taw or Tav, would be saved. So that takes us to Revelation 4. Revelation is not in chronological order. It couldn't be. But back there we find out that Yochanan himself says that he's enraptured. He says, I was in spirit on the day of Yahweh, on the day of the Lord. And of course, the day of Yahweh is the day for the recompense of Jerusalem and the apostate Jewish religion. Right in the midst of the tribulation, 3.5 years after the Neronic persecution begins, that is when the war starts. The saints are promised to be saved, to be rescued out of it. But how? So we go on now to what happens next, and that is with the opening by the Lamb of the fourth seal. So we're going to jump to chapter 6 right now, and that seal. You might want to get out your own Bible or bring one up on your screen and check for common mistranslations that I correct in my version of the Revelation. I say my version, but I can almost say it's the Master's version because I'm looking so closely at these words when I'm translating this, and it's like sometimes it just comes to me. And I praise Yahweh for that. I think the Master or a Holy Spirit is directing me in this work. And I tell you, it's hard work. It's hard work. I came home from church today and I've been sitting here translating chapter 12 of Revelation, and it took, not quite done yet, but it took the entire time from about 1 o'clock up until now, 8 o'clock. That's what I've been doing today. And you know what? I get no complaints from the home folk. That's astounding. Chapter 6, verse 7. When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, remember there were 7 seals on a big old scroll. And everybody grieved because they couldn't find anyone in heaven or earth that could open those seals to find out what the scroll said, to find out what was next, until they found the Lamb. that was slain, but alive again. Of course, that is a stand-in for our brother Yahshua HaMashiach. So here, John heard the voice of the fourth entity or living creature. It's a zoon, zoon. We get the word zoology from that. And zoology has to do with the biology of animals and us. We're an animal to some extent as well. And so zoon is the name of the living creatures. I call it an entity, and I put entity in there only because I want to find a better word for that later. And so using global replace, I can change them all in the entire manuscript if I want to. So a voice comes out of the fourth entity, the fourth living creature, and that voice says, go. Now, your Bible probably has it saying, come. The word behind it is erku. Erku can mean either come or go. But I couldn't see why the voice would saying come. The voice is speaking to a horse. Go. And I looked and saw a pale horse. Choris means pale or light green. Chloros, not Clarice. That's the woman on that horror show from 1990. Chloros, chloros, chloros. A horse, light green, pale, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death. And Hades followed him. Hades, as you know, is the Roman and Greek idea of an underworld. It's roughly equivalent to Sheol of the Old Testament. It just simply means death. Hades followed him. Hades also the name of the god that's over that place. And remember in Revelation that a pit was open and Apollyon or Abaddon came out of there. That could well be the equivalent of the god Hades that was over that place. Now, it can't be good. It can't be good. And they were given power over a fourth of the earth. And we have to look at Revelation 12:8 to find out who they are. So we'll save that. We're just given the idea here that the rider of the pale horse also has a certain army with him. And they are given, that is the army of good abdicates a fourth of the earth, or the land would be better. And it's speaking here not of the earth. The word is gay, and it means in Revelation primarily land or ground. So we're not talking about Japan. We're not talking about Kazakhstan, not talking about Kamchatka. We are talking about the land of Israel. This power of death is given over a fourth of that land. Why do I have earth in there? That has to be changed. I don't want to make that mistake again, but you see, this is one of the detractors from the entire book of Revelation to say that gay means earth gives us an idea that this is going to be not only in the future, but the whole earth at the one time. But that is not the case. Why they are given over the fourth of the land, or how that happens, is because you might remember when we did chapter 13, there was a second beast, a land beast, who I recognize as the Roman legions. It's got two horns. One of those horns is Vespasian, the general. The other of those horns is Titus, the general's son. Each led a huge contingency into Israel, one from the west, Titus from the west, Alexandria, and Vespasian straight on down from the north. So we could almost see, with that idea in mind, this beast with two horns coming down, and one horn goes in the north, and one horn goes in from the west, and they're using a pincher movement. They come down into the land and they destroy everything. They kill everybody they find. This is retribution. This is the day of the Lord, the day of Yahweh. They poison all the streams. They kill all the livestock. They cut down all the trees. They take everything, and anyone they encounter, they kill. And if there's any resistance, they crucify them or chop their head off. This is in Galilee, and actually Josephus talks about one particular battle where he was the general for the Israeli army. The city was Jotapata, Jotapata, and he's in there with the entire inhabitants of the city, and there's a big wall around this place. And Vespasian brings his army down there, and they surround the place immediately, and they start to tear the town down. Well, as I mentioned last time, it took 47 days for the legions to get into Jotapata. And before this battle began, Josephus, who was also a priest and a prophet, he prophesied that it would be 47? It would be 47 days before the Romans would be able to get in there and take the city. And by golly, it was 47 days, so he reports. And he's hiding. They tried to sneak out the back way, but that wasn't possible. A lot of people got killed trying to sneak out. So Josephus finally, at the end, when they breach the walls, he's found down in a basement, and in the basement, down in a tunnel under that. He's down there with a bunch of other people, but he's found out there. And the ones that Israelis that were stuck down in that tunnel when the Romans came in, I will tell you the story if you don't know it. Josephus was the head of the group that was hiding out there. And he got a wonderful idea, and that was to draw lots. This is before they were found out. Draw lots, and the one that gets the short straw will pair up with somebody that got a long straw, and one will kill the other. And then the ones that are left, they'll do it again. Long and short straw, the one with the short straw will kill the partner. This is men, women, and children, till they finally came down to just two people left. One was Josephus, and the other one was, I think his name was Nicanor. Nicanor, maybe. My mind is not fresh on this. It's just too much material. So Josephus has a great idea. He gets himself a short straw. So he kills Nicanor. Then he's supposed to kill himself, but he doesn't. So they're all dead down there in that tunnel, except Josephus. And so the end starts where Josephus is finally found out there by a woman that happened to see him down in the tunnel. And he makes a deal. He calls on Vespasian after he identifies himself, and they begin to talk down there, him still in the tunnel. And he said, to bring me out of here and save my life, I'll tell you what your fate is. And they bring him out. And of course, the Romans are laughing at him. They're going to kill him. No doubt they're going to torture him before they kill him. And he says that we in our culture have a prophecy that somebody is going to rise up out of our land, rise up to rule the world. And that's the Balaam prophecy. In Numbers, a star will rise. It's attributed now to Yeshua, but Josephus explains it to Vespasian, and he says, you are that star, and you are going to rule the world in a very short time. And of course, Vespasian was a mule skinner before he was mustered in to run this war. A mule skinner and a mule trader. I mean, that was a low job at that time. And it was, it was a laughable prophecy. But Vespasian, no doubt, laughs about it. And he says, okay, I'll tell you what. I'm going to chain you up and keep you in chains, and we'll see what happens. If I'm ruling the world, then I'm going to let you go and shower you with gifts. But if I'm not, I'm going to put you to a torturous death and string it out as long as I can. So, 66 to 70, 3.5 years later, Vespasian is acclaimed the new Roman Empire. After, in 68, there were 4 emperors. Rome was in rebellion. 4 different army generals came in, and they all lost their lives within a year or a little more, starting with Nero, then 3 more. Vitellius, Otho, Galba. And then Vespasian is called out of Israel. He leaves the battle of Jerusalem in the hands of his son, Titus, whose best friend turned out to be Josephus. Josephus is taken out of handcuffs, which allows him to start journaling what's going on at the siege of Jerusalem. Not only that, but inside Jerusalem, doomed, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, doomed is his father, his mother, and his siblings. He knows exactly what's going to happen when Jerusalem finally falls, and that is his whole family is going to be murdered unless he can do something about it. And even if he can, chances are that in the city, they're going to be either killed or die of starvation anyway. Because remember, the city was split into 3 parts, 3 different despots at war within the walls of Jerusalem. And one of those factions, the one led by John of Giscala, Josephus' greatest enemy, he writes of him a lot, he burned up the storage of food, the grain, set it on fire, thinking that the dearth of food would cause those inside Jerusalem, including the Nazarenes, to quit being pacifistic about this and to join the rebellion with them. And try to best the Romans. The priests wouldn't do it. The priests were primarily for the Romans. They could make a deal with them. They had been working in cahoots for years, many years. The religious people didn't want to have anything to do that, so they killed most of the priests, many by very, very bad deaths. And the great minority of people within the walls simply starved to death. There was nothing to eat. And there's an account, I think it may come up tonight, in Josephus' Jewish War of cannibalism. Cannibalism where a mother roasts and eats her own baby. That's about as low and as hungry as you can get. So these greenies were given power over the fourth of the land to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence, disease, and by beasts, therion, the exact same word that is applied to Nero the emperor. Beasts on the ground. Hold on a second. Thank you. Got some water here. You want some? Mm. And so now we go on to verse 9. That was a long little piece. Verse 9, when he opened the fifth seal, it's chapter 6, I saw under the altar the sukkahs, or in Hebrew it's nephesh, the beings. In the Hebrew idea, it's not body, soul, and spirit, as I tried to explain earlier this week. That's the Greek, the pagan way of thinking about it. It's our way of thinking about it. But in the Hebrew idea, religious idea, the body and the mind, I guess you say soul, are both one, the nephesh. They're not two, they're one. There's a spiritual being, if a person is spiritual. There's a spirit, and there's a nephesh, a ruach and a nephesh. Two, not three. This is given from a Hebrew perspective here. So he sees under the altar the beings, sukkahs, of those who had been slain for the word of Elohim and for the witness they had borne. Note, these guys, the holy ones, this is 144,000, they have been slain. They have to die, but they're not dead. They're still in existence, and figuratively, John tells us that he saw them under the altar in the heavenly place, the heavenly tabernacle. They had been slain. They have to be slain. That's how they get there. This is how they get rescued. This is how, at the beginning of this wonderful dispensation where death is defeated, the first generation where they died, but they didn't die. Parts of them were kept back. We're also talking about this week, when Yahshua declares a thing, it overarches everything else. Like, for instance, he says, you've heard it said this, but I say this several times in the New Testament. He's the new Moses. What he says goes. His wisdom is higher wisdom. And we need to remember that anytime Yahshua says something, and somewhere else in the scripture it says something contradictory, Yahshua's trumps everything else. Yahshua, what he says, trumps Paul. Yahshua, what he says, trumps the Torah. It trumps the Old Testament. It trumps the writers, if you don't mind me using that word trump. So when Yahshua promises through this entire conglomeration of writings here that these people won't die, as he did in John chapter 5 and many other places, they don't. But just these holy ones being kept under the altar. They're alive, yet they're dead. The first generation, please remember that. No, they didn't go to Sheol. No, they didn't go to hell. They were just normal people, would just die. And they'd be awaiting the resurrection. No, they wouldn't be conscious. The dead know nothing. But for the dead, they will die, and the next thing they'll know is they'll be brought forth in the resurrection and the judgment. But for those who are born of spirit, which the 144,000 certainly were, Revelation is a very, very spiritual prophecy. They were rescued. And wow, first generation, and we follow them if we're born of spirit. If a person is not born of spirit, they just die. Next thing they know is the resurrection and the judgment. And Yahshua says that when they're brought back for the judgment, if they were good, they will live. Not if they were saved, not if they knew Jesus. If they were good, they live, but they'll be living back in the flesh again on the earth, hopefully in sight of the city above, but they'll never get there. And he says that if they were evil, to Acrisius. Acrisius is a legal term. It means a trial. Just like you see on television with Judge Judy, these people, there's going to be a trial. But everything that person has ever done, ever been, and everything about them will flash forth in a second. And they will be able to account for what they did wrong, their sins, and the sins will be weighed against their good works. Yes, this is a judgment of righteousness. And if they are found to be good by a standard, I don't know what it is, Yahshua does, we'll be trained on that, then they live again with a chance of becoming everlasting. A chance. But in that chance, they're going to see Yahshua as the king of all kings, and they're going to be pretty well convinced that that is their only way, because the devil will be taken out of the world. That is also promised throughout the scripture. So that may sound weird, but I ask you to go, open your mind, open your prayer life, and go to John chapter 5 especially, but also 6, 7, and 8, and see if that's what Yahshua said. And if that's what he says, then his opinion is higher than the rest. That's the one we want to take. That's the one that's truth, because he is the way, the truth, and the life. Maybe I could get into preaching mode here. So here we are again, the ones slain for the word of Elohim, number one, Second, for the testimony they had borne. That is the testimony of Yahshua. Two different things. We see these two throughout the Revelation, but we see them first in the first verse of chapter 1 of Revelation. The word of Elohim, the testimony of Yahshua. And we find them popping up again throughout Revelation. In Revelation 7, they are two congregations, the 144,000 and the great multitude of salvation. If you can remember that, there are two groups there set out in Revelation 7. One group is the 144,000. The other is a great multitude with palm branches in their hands crying salvation. We find it again personified in chapter 11 with the two witnesses coming up. They come up, they perform miracles, and they are overcome. They are killed. They rise again. Who are the two witnesses? Well, the two witnesses are a figure. We'll get to them next time if we do. And we can see who they are, but they're really, their significance is in what they stand for. So here we have these under the altar crying out with a loud voice, "Oh, sovereign master, kadosh and true, how long before you'll judge and avenge our blood on those who reside on the ground?" They wanted vengeance. Then they were given white robes and told to rest just a little while longer until the number of their fellow slaves and their brethren should be complete, who were to be put to death as they themselves had been. The 144,000 here are put to death. And at this time, when these sukkahs are crying out from under the altar, the death hasn't ended yet, because there are still some more that need to come in to shed their blood. They say the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, but not the seed of the church, the seed of the Kadoshim, the holy ones of Elohim. The church doesn't fit that profile, I'm afraid. So as you hear somebody say, well, I think I'm in the 144,000, you can't dispute that if they think that. I mean, you can just say to them, well, go over to chapter 6 in Revelation and see what happens to you. Terrible deaths. We have lots of accounts of these people having to die for their faith. Lots of accounts that we can read. And not just Jews, but some Gentiles too. You'll read some if you want to pick up a free copy of the Nazarene Acts, volumes 2 and 3. You can get those on NazareneActs.com to download. So now we got to go on to Revelation 12, verses 7 and 8. Like it says in the Dead Sea Scrolls, these rebellious messengers were defeated at some time. These green horse gangs, maybe long previously, we don't know. But where do they all end up and why?
Brother Jackson, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
So just to kind of clarify what we were talking about on Shabbat, because you brought it up there.
yeah.
Um, in the book of Hanak, it talks about different at chapter 22, it talks about different caves, I guess, or different
Mhm.
sections. And when Yahushua came back. Did all of those go away? Did he wipe those out based on, John 5 when he
No,
talks about how
no. Here's the deal with the caves. There are abysses in the earth. They're actually called skies inside the earth. At least this is how I understand it. And I try to get my understanding just out of the scripture itself, with Yeshua being the main exegete here. The Nephilim and the Gibborim, their offspring, they can be killed, but only part of them can be killed, just the flesh part. The big fat demon or angel underneath cannot be killed in that way. So what's had to happen, clear back from Genesis 6 and probably any time throughout the salvation history of this world, the Nephilim have been banished. At least those early ones have been banished from the earth. And so the flood comes along to kill their offspring as well. But in killing their offspring, the angel inside that flesh is let loose. So what has happened, and you can't really find this in the Bible. That's why the Bible is incomplete. There's other texts like Enoch you just got to have to get an explanation. These skies inside the earth, two of them, in fact, the second and the fifth, they hold the angelic parts of the Nephilim and the Gibborim. They're prisons. Read about that in Revelation. We've got the abyss there where we've got Abaddon coming out of it, or Apollyon, the head of the demons there. That these pits are open there and they come out. They don't want that to happen. But anyway, they're prisons. And in one of those prisons, in one of those spaces, in one of those seven heavens, is contained the angel part of the Nephilim, the fallen angels. They're in there. I think they're in the fifth. The other one, the second, the Gibborim, the offspring of these Nephilim and human women, they're different. The Nephilim are just angels that were able to transform themselves, but the Gibborim are angelic at the core, but because they've been born half human, there is a body there as well. That sounded an awful lot just like a ridiculous myth and folk story, but in our day today, this is absolutely possible. And behind the scenes, they're working on this transhumanism in every country that is developed. They're looking for a way through transhumanism to heal people, but the evil ones are using this technology for other reasons. That's what I think. We don't read much about this, but when we do, we get a little bite of it. The doctors and biologists that are messing in this kind of genetics, mixing them up, recombining genetics, it's usually something beneficial, like, okay, we've got a new cure for, say, diabetes, a new artificial insulin through recombination of DNA, or we've got a new vaccine, or actually a schmaxine, because that's not the idea of a vaccine, but the COVID vaccine is a recombination of DNA. Or we have a carton of Breyer's ice cream that takes the DNA from a particular amphibian. This is true. amphibian and mixes it with the DNA in dairy milk. So your ice cream will taste smoother. And so when you're eating Breyer's ice cream, you're also eating unclean because it's got, what's the name of that thing? A luff. Uh, it looks like a fish with a frog's head, this animal. And I can never remember the name of that thing. I just,
Ogdoads.
huh?
Ogdoads. Ogdoads.
That means eight. Ogdoads? Okay.
Yeah, Ogdoads. That's the one with the frog head and the Egyptian thing.
All right. So whatever it is, you can go down and catch these. People do catch them with their fishing poles, but they are amphibians. So that's what they put in Breyer's ice cream for one. They're using this all the time. And everybody that got a shot for COVID, they probably got something from an aborted fetus. Whether that counts as being unclean and abominable or not, I don't know. I didn't take that, but I got COVID. Woo. Okay. Okay. The ground then. These things can't be killed. They can be imprisoned. Second, heaven. Second, vacuole in the earth for the angelic part of the Gibborim, that is the offspring. And the fifth, the vacuole in the earth, is for the angelic Nephilim. And between those two, there is a river of fire flowing. It's a tributary off the lake of fire, and it separates these two vacuoles in the earth. Okay? In a way, this is a pitiful thing because the Nephilim love their offspring, no matter how evil they were on earth. Of course, the Gibborim, the children, they ate humans, they mated with animals, they desecrated everything they touched, and they were big. They were half and half animal and half human. This is what Enoch tells us. And I believe it because this is the very thing we're working at today. But the parents, the Nephilim, love them. They're family. They love them just as a human being loves their babies. On the other hand, the spirits of the Gibborim don't give a hoot about their parents over there in the fifth heaven. They don't care about them. If there was any way to exploit them, they would. But the parents in the fifth heaven can look over that lake and see them there. And they cry because they can't have contact with their offspring because of that lake, that river of fire that goes through. Now, I suppose you're going to say, where did you get that stupid idea? I got that idea from Enoch because it's in second or secret Enoch. There's not just a book of Enoch, there's all kinds of books of Enoch, all kinds of them. Lots of them are probably fraudulent. And certainly the book of Enoch, none of them were written by the actual Enoch. Okay, 6,000 years ago. Enoch lived in the first 1,000 years after creation. We don't have anything from that time. Nothing. How in the world would we have a scroll? It just doesn't make sense. And having done the Ethiopian language and translating that book of Enoch, Well, though it's not modern, there are modern things in there that certainly didn't exist at that time. So, look, is it wrong because somebody wrote a book under the name of Enoch? No, that was a common practice. In fact, with the exception of Paul's letters, all the books of the New Testament were written under names that are false names. And they are for good reason, because in that day, if you were discovered to have written those books, then you would get the same punishment as a seditionist. You would be killed. So if you're not Matthew, I got to put Matthew's name on here. That'll give us a little bit of fame right off the bat. And second of all, they'll never find me. Absolutely right. Same with the Acts. Only Paul puts his own name on. And if you take a look at the correspondence between Paul and Seneca, who was the guardian of Nero, then you'll see that Paul's letters, because they had his name on it, ended up being the catalyst to kill him. There's 7, 8 correspondences between Paul and Seneca. They're in Rome. No, they don't tell you about that. But you'll see in each set of letters that they exchange that Seneca is reading Paul's letters to Nero and Poppaea. And that's probably also one of the reasons why Nero blamed believers for burning down Rome, because Nero didn't like his books. And it could well be that Paul had something to do with the Great Tribulation, like getting it started. Nero didn't like him. Nero didn't like believers. Nero burned Rome, and Nero could do anything he wanted to. It was like a believer ended up putting the knife into his throat. Epaphroditus, you remember that name? Paul's traveling companion? Put the knife into Nero's throat. With Nero's help, they both did it together. But what we found in Revelation is that Nero came back, not once, not twice, but 3 times Nero came back, was identified. It was the head with the wound that died and then came back to life 3 times. But that's in an earlier section of this teaching. And all this stuff, I'm not trying to tell you stories. I'm trying to tell you what is written in these books. This is something you can't lie about unless you are a liar. And if you are a liar, chances are, if Paul's right, you're going to end up in a bad place. All right, let's see. That was just 10 minutes of stuff. Secret Enoch, you want that book? Yeah, I have it, or you can get it off the internet. Second Enoch or Slavonic Enoch. Going to Revelation 12. To discover the saints again. Excuse me. Like in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I reiterate, these rebellious greenies were to be defeated, and maybe a long time previously, but they all end up here. This is an explanation as to what the war, and any war, why it is replete with war crimes and atrocities, too horrendous to even consider or think about. Though Joseph ben Matthias, that is Josephus, does his best to describe thousands of crucifixions, beheadings in this war, poisonings, burnings, and destructions, and castings off a high place to death as a result of war. The rebellious messengers or angels, they take war very, very seriously. And they always fall on the side of evil. That's why you need to learn how to fight these things. You think that your problem is out of your hands, there's no cause for it. I mean, I just got this thing, I got to deal with this. You're dealing undoubtedly with a demonic entity here, or many of them, and you don't have to call them in. I mean, when they see that you're distressed about something, here they'll come because they live off that distress. Chapter 12, verse 7. I think I'm going to go over and read this from my version that I just got done today. I think I got it done today. Yeah. Uh, Part of it. Maybe I can give a rundown of chapter 12, verse 1 and on to get where we're going. You know the story. A great sign was seen in the sky. A woman surrounded by the sun, and with the moon under her feet, and a crown with 12 stars on her head, and pregnant, in anguish to deliver, wailing, experiencing contractions. And another sign was seen in the sky, and look, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its heads 7 diadems. And its tail is pulling down 1/3 of the stars from the sky, and it threw them into the ground. Maybe you're following your version. And the dragon took his stand in front of the woman, the one about to deliver, so that it might eat up the little child when born. And she bore a son, a male, of course, who was destined to be a herdsman with an iron rod to all countries. And the child was seized up to the Elohim, toward his throne. And the woman fled into the desert, to where she is placed, a place prepared there by the Elohim, so that they might take care of her there for 1,260 days. We're not going to talk about that now. That just gets us to where I want to go. That'll come up later. It is full of information. Verse 7, there was war in the sky. Michael and his messengers must make war with the dragon. And the dragon made war, his messengers also, and it hadn't the might. There was no place found for them in the sky anymore. That is, the dragon and his gang lost. And the great dragon was cast out, the ancient serpent called Diabolos and called the Satana, who led astray the entire population. It was thrown down into the ground, and its messengers thrown down with it. Okay, keep that in mind. A war in the sky. This isn't a war up in heaven. Every time you see heaven in Revelation, what it says behind that is sky. It's another great problem with this old crappy translation and the tradition of keeping these words translated wrong. You probably heard that that rendition I just read, if you read this a few times before, you heard that it's much different. It just surprises me every time. And one of the great pieces of fun that I have, you can call it fun, is to get through with a paragraph in the Revelation and to see what it actually says. They never say what the nearly international version has to say, or the King James version, or any of them. So, war in heaven. Let me go back where I was now. So the war is in the sky, and this other part here in Revelation 12, later on, it says that the devil and his messengers was thrown to the ground, thrown down to the ground. Are they still alive? Absolutely, they are. And in this case, the ground just happens to be Jerusalem and around Jerusalem where all these armies are. And so they come down and begin to start inciting things, inciting and making the people they're able to do all kinds of atrocities that, again, Josephus describes. The Romans already did atrocities, but even in the religious, in Israel, in Jerusalem, they're doing horrible things to each other, even the priests. We still have plenty of evidence today that this war and the loss by the devil and this 1/3 of the stars, that they're still here today. And they've been there throughout history. You know, when they were put into these vacuoles in the earth, that was a long, long time ago. That was 5,000 years ago. Don't you think that they have been falling ever since? With as many people that come into the Yahad and fall out, I've got to think that it's even worse in that place. Angels falling back down here, madder than hell, rebelling. And if they can't rebel in the realm of Elohim, they can come down here and raise all kinds of hell. They hate human beings. We have usurped their authority, and most of the time, we don't even know it. Who can say how many's down here now? I see a lot of them in government. I can see that demonic entity right through their eyes. Can you? Yes, I can. Certainly an innumerable, unnumbered host. Enough. This is a devil-filled world. It's the only place left in the universe where the devil's holding out. You and I were engaged in a war every single day, whether you like it or not, there, church man, church girl. And if you're not engaged in it, you've got to question your relationship with the Almighty in reference to the word and the testimony. If you bring your prayer request up during prayer time from the pew to the pulpit, and you're not doing anything about it at home, you're not praying through, you're not praying for, praying against, You're not binding the devil behind that trouble that your daughter or son is having. Do you think that Yahshua's going to answer your prayer? He says, we gave you that power already. You have the ability to go and do it, just like you'd open a door. You're not doing anything. You're trying to put it on somebody else. Hey, I'm too busy to go down there and help her or him. I'm too busy right now sitting on my throne making intercession for you all this time. Do something yourself. Though our ways of making war aren't carnal, carnal means that they have no effect on spiritual things. Spiritual ways are mighty in the Kadosh spirit. Now, this is like something that Paul is good for. That is Saul of Tarsus. That's why we don't throw Paul out. He's good for a lot of stuff, but when Yeshua has something that trumps him, we've got to look at Yeshua. Now that you know, please learn the techniques of war, and you can learn them. I've written workbooks that when I was a little younger to teach you what you need to know to be at this, and probably in the least laborious way possible. You must learn the techniques of war, and you can learn. If you're tormented by mental, spiritual, or physical diseases, trust that at least part of the problem is demonic affliction, not necessarily demonic possession, but affliction. Everybody is, at least everybody who loves Yahweh and keeps his word and the testimony of Yeshua. And sometimes you don't need a doctor or an exorcist to do something about that part of it. But you must go to war with it if you want to get rid of it. I've got some effective resources and a lot of other books here. You know, I have a used bookstore here. Regardless, let's move back into the first century again. This horrendous account of Josephus and the Revelation. It was made much worse now with the demonic entities fully engaged with the common people, seeking out the saints to see that they are killed, not realizing that they're in a new dispensation at that time and Yahshua can save them. The Lamb can save them instead of them just dying. Spurring the armies on to complete destruction. They're like mad dogs in his account. Elohim uses Roman forces here to express his wrath and defense in wars against him and his people. And that's exactly what the prophet Habakkuk is all about explaining, 3 chapters. The first 2 are original, the third was added on. Yahweh tells Habakkuk in the first chapter there, says, verse 5, look among the nations and see, and be amazed. Be amazed, for work is being wrought in your days that you would not believe if it were told. See, I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation, who is going through the breadth of the earth to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. They are frightening and fearsome. Their right ruling and their exaltation proceed from themselves, not me. Their horses will be swifter than leopards and more fierce than evening wolves. And their horsemen will charge ahead, and their horsemen come from afar. They fly as the eagle rushing to eat. All of them come for violence. The direction of their faces is like east wind, and they gather captives like sand. Oh, certainly, certainly. When these rebels saw these five Roman legions coming up to Jerusalem, they must have been awestruck. It is heathen armies that Yahweh uses to do his bidding in this manner. How many times does he have to warn Israelites to abandon their idolatry and accept the one that he sent as a final sacrifice? But they wouldn't. So, which side is Yahweh on here? Israel or Roman side? He's against them both, as we'll see in chapter 18, so that they can simultaneously war against their own evil kind without even knowing it. So now we must come back to the saints for the last little bit tonight. Thank you for hanging on. I know I go off half-cocked some of the time. Let's get back to the saints. See where their sukkahs happen to end up. Very important. Tell your 144,000 friend they have to die if they're one of those. And then turn them on to this verse and see if they still think they are. 14, verse 1. Then I looked, and wow, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000. They're not under the altar anymore. They under the altar is down low. They've been brought up to Mount Zion. These people now fully in their spiritual bodies who have been held back a little bit, now being the first fruits of the dead. They're with Messiah on the top of the mountain. And I think, as the Old Testament prophets say, that they're there to oversee the day of Yahweh at Jerusalem. Now, you see the armies below, see the people in the walls of Jerusalem, they see the Roman armies surrounding everywhere, and they're able to see all these devils that have come down to make war and incite war. No wonder I translate this, now I looked and wow. And these 144,000 had his name, that is the Lamb, and his father's name written on their foreheads. Can we see how important the correct nomenclature is for the Father and Son for salvation? If this is any indication, then how will Christians get into the great city? Good question. And they're preachers and teachers who should know better than to use names concocted by the beast dressed in blasphemous names. We must continue with that names and titles they were given and not the man-made, which are rife. So again, what's the army doing on Mount Zion? And he has an army, a large army, up there of spirit beings now that are given the same power that Yeshua has. How did they get there? What does an earlier prophecy say about the fate of Jerusalem? Well, I did that last week. So again, what side do you think Yeshua and these saints are on? Israel or Rome? Joshua and his saints were there to stir things up and see and watch and observe, to correct and to do spiritual battle, to see that the day of Yahweh was going the way of Elohim's will. Their intention is to destroy both sides. They already destroyed Rome. It was in the middle of a civil war right at this time, right in the middle. Vespasian, he's out of Israel in Alexandria, waiting for some troops to go up there and clean the place up before he could come. He knew if he went up there at that time, he'd be assassinated. He was a smart guy. He was a good emperor in the end. Yeah, their intention is to see that both sides are destroyed and rescue the worthy with immortality. And I heard a voice from the skies like the sound of many waters and like the sound of thunder. We've got a little bit of time left to read to you a little bit of Josephus' account of what was going on when the 144,000 with Yeshua the Lamb are up on that mount, and regarding the war in heaven, we talked about the war in the sky, because Josephus reports something similar at the very same time, in the very same place, that was seen and heard by perhaps 1 million people and reported on in Haaretz. That's the English language newspaper. Haaretz, of course, means the land. General Titus began an assault on Jerusalem in March of 70. The war is in full swing. The Neronic persecution is slowed down and ending after 3.5 years there because of the war. And with the help of 4 legions, about 24,000, who trapped between 600,000, according to Tacitus, and 1 million people, estimate by Josephus, in the city. It's a lot of people. Fasten your seatbelts. Here's what he tells us. Besides all these, a few days after the feast of unleavened bread, on the 21st day of the month of Artemisius, a certain prodigious, that word in this case means miraculous, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. This isn't a guy in a spirit body. This is a guy that's maybe he's not even saved. I don't know. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those who saw it, and were not the events that followed it. That is, the destruction of the temple is what he's talking about, the events that followed it, of so considerable a nature as to deserve such signals, speaking of what he sees in the sky. For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding the cities. Oh, we're talking about at least 1.5 million people here. Probably no, not more. It was Passover. This thing is happening at Passover. They're seeing something happening among the clouds. Troops, chariots, soldiers, armored soldiers running about. Thus, there was a star resembling a sword, which stood over the city, like the sword of Damocles, and a comet that continued a whole year. Thus also before the Jews' rebellion and before those commotions that preceded that war, when the people were come in great crowds to the feast of unleavened bread, on the 8th day of the month of Xanthicus, And at the ninth hour of the night, so great a light shone round the altar, altar, and the holy house, the Kadosh Kadoshim, that it appeared to be bright as daytime, and it lasted a half an hour. This needs to be unpacked a little bit. Half an hour is mentioned in the Revelation, and the altar is mentioned because that's where the spirits of the 144 holy ones came from. And a light shone down there on that altar, and it appeared to be bright as day. Do you think it's possible that Elohim could be bringing those people out at that time? I think so. And it lasted a half an hour. Look at Revelation 8:1 for the half an hour. It says, when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in the sky for about half an hour. The light seemed to be a good sign to the unskillful. I mean, people that don't have any sense, they look up there and say, oh, isn't this wonderful? But was so interpreted by the sacred scribes as to portend those events that followed immediately upon it. Who are these sacred scribes? Well, Yochanan was one of them, and he interpreted this for us. Is Josephus talking about Yochanan, who is up in the sky? At the same festival also, a heifer, as she was led by the high priest to be sacrificed, brought forth a lamb in the midst of the temple. What's the significance of that? I can think of 4 or 5 significances of that right now. I'm sure you can too. Who is leading these 144,000? So here, a heifer brings forth a lamb. I've got no reason, and neither do you, not to believe him or think he's lying. Moreover, the eastern gate of the inner court of the temple, which was of brass and vastly heavy, and had been with difficulty shut by 20 men, and rested upon a basis armed with iron, and had bolts fastened very deep into the firm floor, which was there made of one entire stone, was seen to be opened of its own accord about the 6th hour of the night. The door came open. Did you hear how big that door was? There was a place that Josephus tells us that an army was trying to get in there, and they couldn't even get the door open, neither on the outside or in the inside. So according to Jewish tradition, the Shekinah, or divine presence, used to appear through the eastern gate and will appear again when the anointed one, the Messiah, comes. Spoken of in Ezekiel 44, 1 through 3. And a new gate replaces the present one. That might be why Jews used to pray in medieval times for mercy at the former gate at this location. That's the Messianic gate. It's closed up. I think it's still closed up today. But here it comes open. A hymn comes to mind. Open wide, ye everlasting doors, let the King of glory in. Now arising from his earthly wars, he the victory do win. Maybe you can remember what that hymn is. I'd like to see the rest of that. Besides these, a few days after the feast, on the 21st day of the month of Artemisius, that is April, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. Oh, I'm going over a little bit, sorry. I suppose, I think I already read this part. Oh, yeah. That's still part about them coming up, and I already talked about that. I think that what we need to do is end up here with Revelation 16, 17. It's a good place to end up on. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice, this is a pouring out of bowls or vials, and a loud voice came out of the shrine. In this passage, in this translation, anytime I see the word neon, speaking of the Holy of Holies, it's translated in your Bible as temple, coming out of the temple. But that's not what that thing is. The neon is not the temple. It is the holy of holiest places. Out of the Holy of Holies makes a big difference. A loud voice came out of the neon, the shrine, from the throne, saying, "It's done." And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake such as there had never been since man was on the earth. So great was that earthquake. And the great city was split into three parts. All right, we'll leave off there. I want to thank you for coming. I don't think there's any chat going on. There might be. Nah, nothing's much in there tonight. That's good. All right. And if you want to come back next week, I'd be happy to see you. Let's see who's here. Oh, good. Oh, good. All my favorite people. Good night, folks.